Greetings, everyone. My name is Greg, and I'd like to spend the time that we have together today to talk about not giving up when we're faced with challenges and when we're faced with obstacles in our way. Throughout the day, you're going to be hearing incredible words of wisdom by many of today's top thought leaders. And the one thing they all have in common is the only way to see their dream come to fruition is to not give up when the going get tough. The fact is, there's always going to be challenges. It's not a matter of if, just a matter of when. And it's how we handle those adversities that makes up our character as a person. There's a great quote. It says, "We can learn more about someone on their one bad day than on all their good days put together." You know, it's easy to be happy-go-lucky when everything's going your direction, but it's when the chips are down, you learn everything about the character of how someone's going to react. And no story illustrates that better than the very first chapter of the #1 best-selling book in personal development, Think and Grow Rich, by the late, great Napoleon Hill. And in there, he tells a story about 3 feet from gold. You see, there was this gold miner named R.U. Darby who got all excited. He went out west to Colorado and he found a little hole. Started digging in it and sure enough discovered a little nugget. He got all excited, so he buried it and hid it. He went home and told his family and friends so they could chip in money to buy equipment to pull it out by the truckload. Well, the first ore cart came up and it was filled with gold. Woohoo, they're going to be rich. But they kept digging and there was no more gold. They kept digging, but there was no more gold. Finally defeated, Darby walks out of that mine and says, "I quit, I'm through," and sees a junk man walking by. He says, "Hey buddy, give me $200. I'll sell you this mine and all the equipment. I'm going home." Well, the junk man, realizing the equipment was worth thousands, said, "Of course, you got yourself a deal." And Darby goes home defeated. But that junk man does something brilliant. He seeks the counsel of someone who's experienced in that industry, and he goes to a local engineer and says, "What happened? Darby hit gold and ran out." The engineer starts laughing. He goes, "Oh my gosh." He goes, "That's so simple. Everyone knows that gold runs in a straight line. It's called a gold vein. What Darby did is come in one side, hit gold, and pop back into dirt." He said, "All you have to do is go back to where they discovered treasure, go 90 degrees the opposite direction, and you'll tap back into the vein." Not only did the junk man pull millions of dollars out, but it still fills Fort Knox today. And the moral is, how many times have we or someone we know quit one class short from a degree or sales or marketing? It's easy to quit it, but it's the people who persevere and go through the challenges that truly come out on top. And I wanted to test that theory for myself. So the last few years, I've had the opportunity to travel the entire world and meet with today's top thought leaders to ask them what they did to overcome their challenges, their adversities. The first gentleman I sat down with was a guy named Dave Liniger. You might not know his name, but you know the business he created. In 1970, he wanted to get into the industry in the other economic collapse. And I asked him, I says, "Dave, what was it like? Was it easy getting started?" He goes, "No, it was brutal." He goes, "It was horrible. For 2 years, every phone call that came in was from a bill collector." He goes, "I was so embarrassed when the phone would ring, I'd run across the hall and pick up the phone so my secretary wasn't put on the spot." He said the 3rd year it got worse. They threw me in jail. They called me a liar and a cheat and a fraud. I said, "What'd you do?" He goes, "I took my attitude from trying to prove the entire world wrong to something more admirable and prove myself right. I knew I wasn't what they were calling me." He says, "I had the courage and the fortitude to pick up the phone." He says, "I called every bill collector and says, 'Look, I'm going to be honest. I don't got 50 grand I owe you, but I got $50 in my pocket. I'll send it to you today along with a promise that I won't quit. Don't give up on me. I won't give up on my dream." He says he called every bill collector every month until the 4th year. Someone finally believed in him, bought the first business, and that's what we know today as Remax Real Estate Corporation. And he says, "Forget about me and my success. I'm just a regular guy. But how many people's lives were changed because I would not quit? And how do we know that the person who's got the idea for the next American dream isn't about to fold in the tent because Visa's calling him right now?" From there, I hopped on a plane and sat down with Genevieve Boss, who started Pink Magazine. And I don't know about you, but I was going through some challenges these last few years. And I said, Genevieve, I feel kind of like a failure. I feel like a loser because things aren't going the happy-go-lucky way that things were going for me in the past. And she said something very profound. She said, never let your mistakes, your setbacks, or circumstances determine your value as a person. I says, what do you mean? And she reached in her purse and she pulled out a crisp $100 bill. She goes, here, do you want this? Things were tough for me, remember? I go, heck yeah. And she crumples it. She goes, here, do you still want it? I go, yes. She takes it, throws it to the ground, and steps on it. She goes, do you still want that? I said, absolutely. She goes, why? I go, it's $100. Things are tight right now. Then she leaned in and said, then why is it when we're faced with challenges, we get crumpled, thrown to the ground, and stepped on? We think our value changes as a person. It's just part of the process and the journey of what we're going through. And I really wanted to test that. And I don't know about you, but I'm a huge fan of science. I read Discover magazine, and there's something that was created many years ago by John Schwartz called string theory. You probably all heard of string theory before. But Albert Einstein on his deathbed couldn't figure it out, how everything was interwoven. But John Schwartz did. He theorized the smallest molecular structure, as everyone knew, was an atom till they cut it in half and made fission. He goes, something smaller is called a quark. But holds quarks together are these little strings that no one can see, and they resonate. It's kind of like the building block of everything. He goes, that's why when you're in a football game and everyone's applauding, you feel that energy because everything is interwoven. But for 10 years, everyone in his family and friends, his peers, they shunned him. They laughed at him. They said his theory was ludicrous and out of his mind. Until an entire decade goes by and Dr. Michael Green and him proved that theory to be the most likely source. And now John Schwartz is credited as being the father of what we know as string theory. And I asked him, I said, John, I got to know, why is it for 10 years when everyone said you're crazy, everyone said you're out of your mind, you wouldn't quit? Why wouldn't you throw in the towel? He looks at me and said, I knew I was right. But how many people talk you out of your own dream? How many times do we let other people stinking thinking steal our goals? And then he said something extremely profound that changed my life, and I share with you from him directly. He said the difference between someone who's successful and someone who's not is successful people seek counsel and ignorant people seek opinion. And I says, what's the difference? And he says, well, opinion's usually based on ignorance or lack of knowledge. They've never done it before. Where experience and wisdom is counsel. So if you go to someone who's never written a book, for example, and I say, hey, I'm going to write a book, they might say, you can't do that. Why not? I don't know. You just can't. Well, that's their opinion. If I go to Mark Victor Hansen, who wrote Chicken Soup for the Soul and sold 100 million books, and say, Mark, I want to write a book. He's going to say, great, but before you get started, here's what you need to know, and give me counsel based on all of his knowledge and experience. John Schwartz said if more people would spend their daily lives only seeking that counsel and in ignoring opinion, their lives would change accordingly. And people always say, you know, well, what was your favorite interview? Who's the favorite person you sat down with? And it's like picking your favorite child, but the most unlikely source came from Evander Holyfield. You know him, the boxing legend? He won more heavyweight championships than anyone else. And I asked him, I says, Evander, what makes you so special? He looks at me and said, I have a higher standard. I go, what do you mean? He says, if you have a car, so to speak, and so does your neighbor. He goes, if you will not tolerate your car being dirty or running bad, you have a higher standard, chances are you have a better car than your next door neighbor. He said, in sports, I showed up early, I left late, I invented exercises, I had a higher standard, and I won more championships than anyone ever will. And then I asked him, I said, but Evander, be honest, didn't it hurt being in a fight? He goes, oh gosh, yeah. He goes, but when you're in the middle of a fight, you don't focus on the pain, you don't focus on the blows. As soon as you focus on the pain, where do you think you end up? On your back, knocked out. He said, that's what people do outside the ring. They focus on the gas prices and the war and the economy, and they wonder why they never become a champion in their own quest. And then he pulled me in really tight and he said, You want to know the funny thing? When you do win the championship, he said, everyone comes to their feet and they chant your name. They raise their hand in victory, and a guy comes out with a big shiny belt and puts it around your waist. And at that moment, at that second, you don't feel even one of the punches you took along the journey. But the guy in the losing locker room is going to feel every bruise for the rest of their life, wishing they had a higher standard. And although I don't know each and every one of you personally, I do know what we're going through. And when we're faced with challenges and we're faced with obstacles and we think there's no end, remember this simple line. Our greatest success and accomplishment is always going to come just one step beyond our greatest setback and failure. So if we're going through times where we think this is the bottom of the barrel, good news. That means you're in good company. The test is this. When you know in your heart you're doing something right and you're on the right path, don't ever let other people talk you out of your dream. Always seek the counsel, ignore the opinion, and never quit, never die, and never throw in the towel when you're just 3 feet from gold.